Thank you very much for having me. I am completely unqualified to be here, but delighted to be here nonetheless. Actually, to be precise, I am only partially unqualified because my new project does involve human analytics, I realized. But before I get to that, let me give you some very quick background. As Andra mentioned, I am a writer, and I like to dive into my topics, become a human guinea pig. And a few years ago, I wrote a book about the Bible. And this came about because I grew up with no religion at all. As I say in the book, I'm Jewish, but I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian. So no offense to the Olive Garden. Wonderful, wonderful restaurant. But my wife and I had a kid, and we wanted to know what to teach him about our heritage. So I thought one way to learn about the Bible would be to dive in and actually try to follow it, see what it says, and live it. So I made a list of every rule that I could find in the Bible. And as you might know, this is a very long list, over 700 rules. And I wanted to follow them all without picking and choosing. So I wanted to know which were the ones that would make my life better and which were the ones that would make my life not so better. So I followed the famous ones, the 10 Commandments, and love your neighbor, of course. Be fruitful and multiply. I was fruitful and did multiply. I had twin boys, so I take these very seriously. But I wanted to follow the hundreds of rules that are not as well known. So the Bible says, for instance, in Leviticus, it says, you cannot shave the corners of your beard. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow. And by the end, I had some serious topiary on my chin. And as you might imagine, I spent quite a bit of time at airport security. That is true. And it was a hugely challenging year in many ways. First of all, it was challenging because I was, the Bible says you cannot do things like lie and gossip and covet. And I'm a journalist, and I live in New York City. So that's like right there, 80% of my day shot. But it was also challenging because I was trying to follow rules that don't quite jibe with modern American customs. For instance, one that pops to mind, stoning adulterers. I was able to stone one adulterer. I used very small stones, like pebbles, because I didn't want to, but I was able to check that off my list. I did not become ultra-religious, but I did learn some really life-changing lessons about gratitude, about community, and, by the way, I realized that one of the most important things I learned was that God, the God of the Bible, was a huge fan of people analytics, very far ahead of the curve. If you know, in Luke 12:7, it says, the very hairs on your head are numbered. So he's basically saying everything is counted, everything is quantified. So you guys can feel pretty good that you are following in some esteemed footsteps. And by the way, there are about 100,000 hairs on the head. Less on mine every day. But my next book relates more directly to people analytics. This came about because, oh, by the way, I realize I have a couple more pictures for you. That was what I did start dressing the part. The sheep, full disclosure, was not. That was a rental sheep, just for the photo. And this is how this is before Uber, how I hailed cabs. So now I don't need it. A couple of years ago, I got an email from a man, and he said, Dear AJ, you don't know me, but I'm your 12th cousin. So naturally, I figure the next line is, here's my bank account in Nigeria. Please wire $10,000. Turns out he was not asking for money. Instead, he's part of this group of researchers and scientists who are revolutionizing family trees. It used to be a family tree, if it was big, it had 100 people, a couple hundred. Now family trees are exploding. They're not trees, they're forests. And they're exploding for two reasons. First, because of the revolution in DNA testing. So I did a genetic test with 23andMe, for instance. They send me hundreds of cousins I didn't know I had, including, this was interesting, my wife. Turns out my wife and I are cousins. So, and our kids are fine. You saw them. They don't have two heads. So we're seventh cousins, so it's relatively safe. I thought it was cool, like it'll spice up our marriage, but She was like, a little freaked out. You can't please everyone. Anyway, the second reason the family trees are exploding is because of the digital revolution. The internet has allowed us to merge family trees online, to combine them. So you upload your family tree, and if there's and there are several websites that do this, guinea.com, Wikitree, and if there's an A.J. Jacobs on my tree and an A.J. Jacobs on some other tree, then you can merge the trees, and you just keep combining and combining until you get these massive, mega family trees. And they start in the thousands, tens of thousands. Now they're up to the millions. I'm part of something called the World Family Tree, which is literally 100 million people related by blood or marriage. It just passed 100 million about 3 weeks ago. And this is all 160 countries, all ethnicities. I can't even show it on the screen, obviously, because there are only 2 million pixels on a screen. So I'm on this tree, and believe it or not, many of you are on this tree, whether you know it or not. Jennifer Lopez is on this tree. President Obama is on this tree. And what's great is you can trace the connections between any two people. So, for instance, President Obama, that's a visual of just like a tiny chunk of it, like 20,000. But President Obama this is true. He is my aunt's 5th grade aunt's husband's father's wife's 7th grade nephew. So practically my older brother, I think. So this is 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but everyone is Kevin Bacon. And there's a Stanley Milgram experiment you might have heard about 6 degrees. And this is that writ large. And by the way, 100 million people, that's just the start. In a decade, it's very likely we'll have a super tree that connects almost all 7 billion members of the human family, which to me is just extraordinary. It's like the ultimate people analytics data set. And it means that phrase we always heard, the family of humankind, is not this hippy-dippy cliche. It's a fact. You know, we've got the ultimate social network. The farthest that any two humans are on Earth is a 70th cousin, and that's by blood. By marriage, we're even more closely interlinked. Now, this has many implications. First, there's the scientific implications. This is a wonderful data set. There are scientists already researching it, how to figure out how diseases are passed down, how populations migrate, and how longevity works. There's a great Israeli scientist at Columbia working on it named Yaniv Ehrlich. The second implication is even more practical right now for me, because it's a game changer in terms of business. It's like LinkedIn on steroids. It's like the greatest networking I've ever done. So for the last couple of years, whenever I want to meet someone, I just figure out how they're related to me. I wanted to interview George H.W. Bush, not W, H.W. Bush, for an article, so I called his chief of staff, and she said, "I'm sorry, the president's not doing interviews." And I said, "Yeah, but I am his cousin." And she's like, "Well, in that case, come on down." So I was able to interview the president, and I've, going around the country meeting all of my other cousins. I got many more, and I love this idea that we're all related so much, I wanted to celebrate it, so I decided to throw a party. So last summer, I threw a family reunion called the Global Family Reunion, and all 7 billion of my cousins were invited to attend. We did not get 100% participation. Some couldn't make it, but we did get 3,700 cousins in New York, plus we had 40 simultaneous reunions around the world, in New Zealand and in Mexico, and it was a very weird experience. It was fun, but also incredibly stressful and exhausting, but uplifting. We had 58 speakers, including Henry Louis Gates, and, most important, Wharton professor Adam Grant. I think you saw a picture. We had a rabbi, a reverend, and an imam come to speak. Not a joke. They actually came. And that first picture you saw was we brought in Sister Sledge. So to sing "We Are Family," of course, the theme song. Now, I loved it because scientifically, Sister Sledge is very accurate. We are family, and now for the first time ever, we can see it. And what my big hope is that when we make this so clear and concrete with data, it might help break down tribalism just a little bit. Because we share 99.9% of our DNA, and it's not us versus them, it's just us. That's it. That's all there is. And this notion of one big family, I hope, is bad news for bigots, because it's not going to end war and racism. I know that. But perhaps it will nudge folks in the right direction. And I've seen this in my own life. It's sort of altered my mindset. I'll give you one very trivial example. You guys know Judge Judy, the TV personality. I always found her incredibly abrasive, just unpleasant. I can't stand her. Then I found out she's my sixth cousin, 3 times removed, and I'm like, you know what? She's not so bad. She's just doing her Judge Judy shtick, and she's probably sweet underneath. So it changed, and I'm hoping that Judge Judy effect, as I call it, will actually generalize. And luckily, I'm not the only one who thinks this, because as I mentioned, I have no credentials. But some of you might know Cass Sunstein, who is a great behavioral economist at Harvard. And weirdly enough, he's my actual cousin. He is a first cousin once removed of mine. And he spoke at the Global Family Reunion, and he wrote an article about the global family and what he calls the family heuristic. So he argues that we have a cognitive bias to treat family members better. And obviously, for evolutionary reasons, you want to treat your DNA better so it'll survive. So what this idea of the global family does is it sort of takes this family heuristic, it hijacks it, and applies it to everyone. So it becomes more universal, and this is the big hope. And by the way, I know a lot of you are in HR, so this is going to wreak havoc on those nepotism policies, because you are going to be hiring your relatives. So I'm very excited about this project, and I haven't even written the book, but I will someday. And I'm honored to talk about it today, and thank you for having me, and can I borrow some money?